Welcome to the Freedom CEO podcast. It's about becoming the chief decision maker over your life in order to step into a life of freedom. From business, health, wealth, charity, and giving back to just doing life on your own terms. I am your host, Shay Imbidiata. I am an award-winning activist, change maker, and a multifaceted impact entrepreneur with over a decade of experience in business, philanthropy, and health and wellness. In this space, I'm going to be bringing you insights, not just from me, but from incredible thought leaders around the globe to help you start making decisions towards living a life of freedom so you can live a life you love. Are you ready, guys? Because we are going all in. I love nothing more than to talk about things that really matter, especially when it comes to the issue and topic of freedom. Joining me today is Simon Esler, who fights for free thought with every tool he has. After building a free-thinking 14,000 member think tank on Facebook, Simon was censored across social media for challenging official narratives. In response, he pivoted his focus to providing content to freedom-oriented streaming platforms such as Rise TV and Dauntless Dialogue, refining his skills as a researcher, content creator, and filmmaker within private communities. After almost half a decade of writing, shooting, and editing original content focused on modern warfare from a psychological, cultural, and spiritual perspective, Simon decided to release his first independent project for the public at large. Cut. Daughters of the West is a film that is being released April 15th worldwide. This film combines his skills and his passions into one. Simon is on a mission to win the ongoing war against free thought and human liberty. Are you ready for this conversation that I have with Simon Esler? It is heavy. I am going to give you that warning. It might even make you uncomfortable, but I am telling you, it is absolutely insanely important that we are having this conversation right now. I look forward to your thoughts after the show. If you are being censored these days, that tells me you're questioning their narrative and most often going against it, which for me translates to truth, seeking, and speaking rather than misinformation. Censored, Simon Esler, welcome to the Freedom CEO. I'm so happy you're here.
I am very happy to be here as well. Thanks for having me. And yes, good old censorship, the badge of honor.
I know, isn't it though? It's wild. We never thought it would be. And yet here we are.
Yeah, it's a big deal. I think, it's been the impetus to really refine my craft though. So props to all those creepy censorship people because, you motivated me to an extent.
Totally. Well, okay. So I thought before we get into it, I'm so excited for what we're going to talk about today. Simon has released a film that's going to be official on April 15th, and we're going to dive into that, where the world premiere, where you can go download that. But I thought it would be kind of unique to bring the personal factor a little to this because most people probably wouldn't know, but Simon Esler is known to me as either Esler, his last name, or Cy, because we went to high school together and that's where we met. And little did we both know that fast forward basically 15 years, 17 years later, that we would both be sitting down together to be talking about such passionate, important topics around freedom, human rights, censorship, what's going on today, and really being freedom fighters. So it's pretty cool.
It's really awesome. Like to come full cycle like this and to be crossing paths after, I know we've had to go through a lot to get to this point. And so it's cool to have that divergence to go through, the darkness and the struggle of waking up and then not just waking up, but then taking it as inspiration to be of service to freedom, generally speaking. So it's really cool. It's amazing to see where you've come. I'm really, really excited to get into your journey as well. It's so awesome.
So I want to share with people, like Simon and I, friends in high school. And then as you do life, you go one way, I go the other way. You see each other on Facebook, on social media, you catch up once in a while. You and I had reconnected at the beginning of COVID around some freedom points and kind of going, are you thinking how I'm thinking about how everybody else is not thinking? If you catch the drift in that. And we were like, yeah, I think we're aligned. And then we both, again, just kind of like spiraled out. You went your way again. I went my way. And it wasn't until recently, for those of you guys who have been following my journey, I shared that I removed my breast implants after 11 years. I had 2 sets. And I recently launched Reclaim, which is an explant embodiment retreat for women who have removed their breast implants. And it was through that Simon reached out to me going, this is nuts and wild. Like, not only do we align on the human trafficking piece and fighting exploitation of people, but Simon is bringing out an incredible film that I had the honor of watching called Cut, Daughters of the West. And Simon, because you're here, no better than to explain what is this film? Why did you create it? And like, what's it about for people?
So this film, I was inspired to create it because I had been researching the war on the family, to be honest. And one of the things I ended up looking at was, what's really harming children right now in that larger warfare operation, I guess you could say. And I came across the way that gender ideology was affecting kids. And then the deeper I went into that research, the more I realized that it was affecting girls way more than boys. And then when I looked at the way it was being dealt with in the media and even in the way people were pushing back against it, I noticed that it was very politicized, that there was a lot of hyper political language and political narratives with both left and right kind of taking advantage of it to an extent to, I think, radicalize their followers in a political way. And that just felt totally wrong to me. And it felt like that's not really the best way to look at it, because I think when it's about children, it's not political. So I wanted to do a bit of deeper digging into like, what's really going on here? How is it possible that there has been an absolute explosion in trans girls? Like, the numbers are wild. Like, you have a 4,000% increase in the UK over, I think, 8 years. It quadrupled in the United States over like a 1.5, 2 year period. So it really has shot up. But I was curious as to what were the foundations that allowed for that to happen? Because it's not like that can just occur right away with no, I think, cultural foundation. And when I really looked deeply into it, what I ended up looking through was the cosmetic surgery industry and the culture around cosmetic surgery. And the thing that I found that was so startling was that actually right before this explosion in trans girls was an explosion in teenage girls, in minors, getting breast augmentation and labiaplasty, which is cosmetic genital surgery. And it was very telling to me that so many young girls were seeking to modify their bodies at younger and younger ages at these rising rates. And then as you have that happening, you also have this craze of girls saying, I'm a boy, and looking to get testosterone to modify their bodies. They're getting their breasts removed. So it's like it's inverted in a way, but I saw them as something very similar. And so what I discovered was that, culturally speaking, we have been sending girls this message that your body is an obstacle to who you truly are, and you need to overcome your body to be who you are. And that message has been normalized for a long time. And we did not take heed of what that message really meant. And we didn't notice that it was becoming more and more normalized, so that is actually the foundation that allowed something like gender ideology to take off. And to me, that was important because that's not really political, right? The messaging that brought forward this notion that girls need to modify their bodies to be who they really are, that created the rise in breast augmentations and labiaplasties, that wasn't brought forward through gender ideology. It wasn't brought forward through any kind of left-wing extremism. It was something that everyone was participating in, co-creating. So I ended up making this film as a call to action to parents and to society at large to let's take a deeper look at what we've been normalizing, because that's a big piece of what is happening to the daughters of the West and why they're in so much trouble right now.
Totally. And, I think it's really important to highlight, we say the word adolescence, and I don't think, it really registers the weight of the age group we're talking about. And in the research in your film, girls, it's starting at 11, 12, 13 years old that are being told that when they're having these mental health issues or having a thought, maybe feeling not even that you have to feel uncomfortable in your body, but maybe questioning like who you are and what feels good. And rather than referring them to a psychologist, referring them to a therapist to work through some of these thoughts, many doctors are saying, well, if this is how you feel, then you must be uncomfortable in your body. Therefore, you would feel better in a different body, and are prescribing them hormone rejectors to then suggest that they should totally have a sex change at 12 and 13 years old. Yeah. And I mean, you and I were in high school together. I remember, who Simon was in high school. You remember who Shane Vidiata was in high school. And we all think we know who we are in that moment. And it's not until years later, you're really like, I didn't know who I was at all. Or I was thinking about, I read this really interesting statistic about people who, in high school were told, you got to figure out what you want to do for the rest of your life, not who you want to be. Like, what do you want to do? Which is even less, there's more ability to change and pivot in what you want to do with the rest of your life, right? And I think about what I wanted to do, maybe what you wanted to do. And many of us go and get degrees for that, right? You spend years in university or you're off at college to get this university degree to then for the rest of your life pursue this path. And the Washington Post published a few years back saying that only 27% of all college graduates, university graduates, have a job related to what they majored in. Yeah. And that for me, when I was watching your film, reading these statistics, hearing the stories and heart-wrenching stories, I have to say, I broke down a few times crying in your film, hearing the testimonies of some of these kids that are 16 and now in their early 20s, and knowing that they're destroyed, no matter how much they try to heal, no matter how much you try to reverse the effects that have been done. This is lasting trauma. So I think about how many times people change what they want to do in their life, and only 27% of people who go through with their degree actually have that relation. And at 12 years old, we're going, well, maybe you should just switch your gender. You should become a whole different person. How can you decide that at 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, even 19 years old?
That's right. That's right. The truth is that we all know as adults that it takes decades to develop a stable identity. We all know this from personal experience. Yeah. And this fundamental knowledge that we all have is being undermined. People are being gaslit. They're being told that children know who they are. And the framework that's being used to tell children that is what's called the gender affirmative model. And this model is being pushed onto kids and families in the United States and in Canada. And it doesn't have a scientific foundation to it, even though there's a lot of disinformation out there saying that it does. And it's very difficult for parents and children to navigate this landscape of what is essentially information warfare. And one of the ways we can know that it's information warfare is because you can look at some of the mainstream media is saying, here in Canada and in America, saying that the gender affirmative model saves lives. It stops gender non-conforming youth from committing suicide. And they like to say that, but they'll keep you in a bit of an information bubble so that you're only looking at sources, from American institutions, let's say, that are pushing this gender affirmative model. But then if you go over to the UK, you find out that the Tavistock Institute in the UK, they completely ditched the gender affirmative model. In fact, their gender clinic was shut down after a review because they, number one, had clinicians leaving in droves saying we are overdiagnosing children with gender dysphoria. Number two, they found out that it was permanently damaging girls. And number three, when they looked into it, they found out that the gender affirmative model didn't actually have any science to back it, and that their mistake, according to Dr. Hilary Cass, who was who performed the review of the Tavistock Institute's gender clinic, the mistake they made was copying the gender affirmative model from the United States. So they admit that copying this model is what caused harm. And then you can look at Sweden. They ended the gender affirmative model. Norway ended the gender affirmative model. We have entire nations that have stopped doing this. And yet the media here will tell you that this is a life-saving model, but they will keep that information from parents, which to me is heartbreaking, because there are parents whose children are coming home from school where the children are being indoctrinated into the idea that they can be trapped in the wrong body. Then they're presenting this notion to their parents and they don't know any better. And if the parents go and read Scientific American, it looks like there's lots of citations that prove this. And yet they don't know how censored their newsfeed is in terms of what's happening elsewhere in the world. So, that's where this idea that we know who we are at a young age is coming from. And it's very dangerous. It always has been dangerous. The career track model that you're talking about, the idea that you need to pick your career, this is not how life works at all. We wind through life. We go experience lots of different things. We experience a range of different jobs, and that helps us develop who we are. So, it's like a big part of what I'm saying in the film, that there's broad foundations to these cultural norms that allowed this to happen. And that's definitely one of them. It's a dangerous idea. Children need to be given time to develop who they are and to be free in the space inside themselves to do that.
Totally. And part of parenting is not just protecting your child, but you don't always give what your child wants, right? Like, because you know better. It's the analogy of a child wanting to put their hand on the stove, on a hot burning stove. Like, do you want them to do that? No, you're going to go and protect them and say no. And they're going to throw a tantrum and start crying because they really want to do that. But you as a parent, the harm on the other side, the pain that's going to come to them on the other side. And a child doesn't have, it's why we don't allow you to even vote till you're like 18, 19 years old, right? Your brain just doesn't have the capacity at that age and even into the adolescence up to in your 20s to be able to make a full rounded decision and have that capacity. And for me, it's completely criminal. It's evil at its core, in my opinion, as to what is happening today. And, I'll even just share my own kind of personal story, and I hope my mom doesn't get too mad at me about sharing this. But, in watching your film, I was thinking about my own journey. And when I was probably in grade 2 or 3, so I don't know, how old are you then? Like 8 or 9, something like that. My mom chopped my hair. I had the boy kind of mushroom cut because my hair wouldn't grow. So my mom thought, if it won't grow, you trim it, you cut it, and then maybe it'll grow. For almost the rest of my life, I have wanted to have long hair, and I still have long hair today. And I think about chopping it sometimes and I'm like, I don't want to, because for so long, I didn't like how I felt. Obviously, I don't recall thinking maybe I looked like a boy, although I'm sure that's in there somewhere, right? Because seeing my brother with short hair and boys with short hair, and I was probably one of the few girls with short hair. And as I grew up, there was a time where I was in grade 5. So a couple of years later, I didn't like my name. Because I had issues with that. People would say, what's your name? And I'm, grade 5, you're like, I don't know, 10, 11 years old. And I'm like, Shay. And they go, huh, what? And I received that as like negative, versus having a name like Jessica. Everybody knows a Jessica. Everybody knows a Simon, right? And so you're not repeating your name. And I decided I wanted my name to be Joey from Full House, Uncle Joey, who is a man, is a boy. And I liked it. And at that time too, I was like, well, I'm going by Joey. Jessica Running, who you might remember from high school, she started calling me Joey. Totally annoyed my mom. Like, that's not your name. What are you doing? I was like, I like it better. And my mom, it's a boy's name. I started dressing more like what we growing up called a tomboy. Not having gender dysfunction, thinking that like now I'm wanting to transition to be a boy. I'm confused in my body. That's not how we grew up. It was just known as, oh, she's a tomboy. I like playing soccer. I hated ballet. My mom tried putting me in ballet and I would lose my shoes. I would hide my tutu. And if you're not properly dressed, you can't actually like go into the class. And I would do something so that I could have to be put in the sit out, timeout section. I loved playing soccer. I wanted to play baseball. I wanted to hang out with the boys, skateboarding. Like I all of a sudden was doing all of these things that we would identify as more masculine and therefore more male boy things. today, those are some of the greatest gifts I have as a woman, as a female, standing in my own femininity. Because I carry these masculine traits, I'm able to be in certain rooms and have advantage amongst men and also women, because I have both sides. And when I was watching your film, I thought, how destructive would my life have become if my parents had this conversation and said, well, we got to take her to a doctor because, she clearly is wanting to be a boy.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I was just going through a phase, and my parents stuck the course and allowed me. That was the beautiful thing. They allowed me to experience. They allowed me to, and there's a really big difference. Like, I can hear some people saying, well, if you're wanting that experience and you're trying to test things out, then maybe that's the path. Where, I say, I'm like, there's a really big difference in letting me wear jeans and baggy shirts and get my knees dirty and not paint my nails and all of the more feminine girl things, than chopping off my breasts and also, having genital surgery and hormone blockers to see, not as a guarantee, but just to see if that feels better, and the irreversible damage that then comes about because of that.
Yes. I mean, this is a huge problem. There are tomboys being transitioned. Now this is happening. It's impossible to be a tomboy. Girls in that position are actually in real life physical danger.
Yeah.
That's also very common with, women or girls who would become lesbian adults are being transitioned. And this is what the actual science shows. So, the best science shows that the majority of children with gender dysphoria, they grow out of it. 90% of kids grow out of it. But more than that, the vast majority of those kids that grow out of it actually end up being gay and lesbian adults. Right. So this is also a homophobic problem, because you're transitioning that. And I think, this notion that that kids go through phases, it's so insane that we have to even reaffirm this notion, that we have to point that out. Like, we shouldn't have to talk about that, but we do, because, they're putting children on, first of all, they're socially transitioning the children, right? So they're doing the whole pronoun thing, and they're taking the full gender affirmative approach. Now, once a child is socially transitioned, the chances of them going down the medical path shoot up, statistically speaking. Very, very high chances. So this is why the NHS over back in the UK, not only when they shut down that gender clinic, did they speak out against the medical transitioning, they stated that socially transitioning children is a severe psychosocial act with potential trauma and very, very large implications. And they do not recommend even socially transitioning children. So there's that. But then you have puberty blockers. Okay. This is another thing. They're saying that it's reversible. It just pauses puberty and gives the kids time to think. Puberty blockers are actually a substance called Lupron. And Lupron is what is used to castrate sex offenders. Okay, this is what is used to castrate pedophiles. They're giving it to children under the guise that they're giving them time to sort out their gender. Meanwhile, pausing puberty has severe implications. There's problems with developing bone density. There's parts of your brain that develop according to the hormonal changes that occur during puberty. This is a very delicate process. Hormones in general are a very delicate thing. This is something people need to understand, that the balance of hormones in the body, they are meant to be in a very narrow range. So it's quite extreme to be playing with hormonal balance in developing children like this. And then, of course, the next step after they've been put on puberty blockers is then the hormone therapy, where for girls, which is the majority of people who are being transitioned as youths, they are put on testosterone. And this is a very strong substance, right? This is like, it's been known as a very strong substance. Giving someone testosterone injections is a very extreme medical process. And again, this is what they're giving to these teenage girls. And that's a lot where a lot of the damage is coming from. So their voices become permanently deep. Some of them go bald. So you have like girls that like they literally look like George Costanza now. Like they didn't know this was going to happen.
Right.
You have sterility. There's a big danger in going on testosterone, because what happens is the girl's body, of course, stops going through the motions of having a period. And what happens is you delay the period is no longer functioning because the girls are on so much testosterone. But if they choose to stop, the chances of them getting things like cervical cancer or ovarian cysts, all these things, they shoot up, because after they go off of it, their body starts to try to get the period going again. And their insides are such a mess that it's actually dangerous for them to start having their period. And so the other thing that has happened to a lot of these girls is that when they decide to go off of testosterone, they end up needing a hysterectomy to save their own lives from the fallout of the testosterone. So this is it's not what people are being told. The idea that the gender affirmative model saves lives is it's such a very dark and very dangerous lie.
Yeah. Which, you hear something over and over and over and over and over again, and you start to believe that, and if we didn't realize that before, and this is so evident in so much of our culture, if you go and you really look at the history and you look at marketing, there was a time where doctors were promoting cigarettes, saying cigarettes are safe, and doctors smoke Marlboros or Marvels or whatever they are, right? And we were told alcohol during pregnancy is safe and like there's nothing wrong with it, right? Like there was that time, Pamela Anderson being used as the icon of needing to have big breasts was then beautiful. And that's where you see the plastic industry specifically and in breast augmentation just skyrocketing. And we use all of these words to create, or it is created, I should say, the narrative and the belief that then we're to abide by, and therefore we must accept, and if you didn't look into the history and your only experience was starting at 2020, my hope, I know your hope, is that people start to logically and critically think about these catchphrases that are coming out and are used everywhere, right? Like when you say, that the model is safe. I haven't done this myself, but I'm willing to bet that if I go into Google and I put that model is safe, I'm going to see all of these news articles across all of the United States that all have the same headlines, right? No different than safe and effective. And you're going to see all across news lines across the states that it is this narrative that is being pushed. And therefore, to question that, you're now in a threat of being canceled. You're going, in that censorship culture. And I mean, that for me, whenever you see that being pushed, it's an automatic, I'm going the opposite way, the automatic,
Yep.
And I think about just even when you say hormone blockers, how that doesn't in itself, to me, it sounds whacked. Like to me, that's like, fucked up, but it doesn't sound per se scary. Okay. Like maybe to some people, it doesn't sound scary. No different than birth control, right? That's another word that we have been so conditioned. We have been so normalized. I was on birth control for probably 4 years. I had all kinds of issues with talk about my hormones being blocked, out of balance, my pH levels, all this kind of stuff. And it still has an effect on me today. And I haven't been on birth control, God, probably 10 years. Like I haven't been on birth control for 10 years, give or take. And what we don't question is what is the ingredients, what's going on behind that term? Because when you break it down and you realize the chemicals, it's not just an imbalance of hormones or blocking something, but you're actually injecting certain chemicals to stop the natural reaction, the natural rhythm that's going on in your body. And that has years, decades of problems and effects. You also mentioned the psychology and it going into the brain that can also cause problems. Gluten. If you were to eliminate gluten today out of your entire diet, for most people, it will take over a year to get gluten completely out of your body. And I share that because that's relatable to most of us, right? The organic culture kind of came on the scene 10, 12 years ago. And we're all very more versed in that, looking at pesticides, GMO, the importance of organic, and now like gluten-free everything, right? Gluten can take a year to get flushed out of the body. So when you think of hormone blockers and chemicals that are being injected into you day in, day out, that are way more harmful, to then stop them and then try to bring your body back into harmony, back into balance, and restore the damage that's been done, the probability of that is much lower. And that's not what we're, especially when you're a kid, right? Like you talk about bone density. We're still developing as children into adolescence and even into our young 20s. And so when you stop that process of development, it's like you don't have that muscle anymore to actually even be able to recover and to try to repair. Which is just, it's devastating to me.
What you're talking about is, again, one of these norms, these things that have been normalized for so long that it's become invisible to everyone. And there has been basically an open war on women's biology. That is it's something that I have found in my research to a huge extent, that our culture has not honored or protected women's biology specifically for a long time now. Birth control is a great example of that. I've seen lots of women speaking out about the harms of birth control. They were not told that it would make it harder to have children when they wanted to. They were not told that it alters women's bodies in the sense of who they seek as a partner. It changes their chemistry so that they might not seek a man that actually fits for them because their hormonal balance and their sense of the man's hormones are completely flipped around. Okay. So you have that as an example, but you even have like the birthing process and hospital births and the way that women are treated and rushed to the hospital as if birth is this nightmarish emergency. And then their bodies are invaded by doctors. And, the taking back of birthing culture is something that's also happening. And again, the theme there is women waking up to the power of their biology, that we have millions of years of biology actually in, driving the woman's capacity to be the matrix of our whole species forward. The statistics on cosmetic surgery, it's all women. Men aren't getting cosmetic surgery. It's 92% women. So There is this idea that women's bodies need to be controlled, they need to be changed, they need to be modified. And we have let that become so normal that we are now looking at a major, major fallout from this. And some of the work that I've been doing in my research on the family, I found a lot of family devotion science, like the actual science of family devotion. And there's so much beauty there. That's something that I've tried to uplift. In my docuseries Superorganism, this is one of the things I looked into. I wanted to research the idea of the family unit as a superorganism. What is it to look at the family as this superorganism that gathers human wisdom and that contains it and then helps send that human wisdom into the future? And I found the most beautiful science on women's bodies, especially like what's magical about what women are doing, like when they are carrying a child. There's some really incredible things going on. Like the woman's body becomes basically a biofield when she is pregnant. And the biofield of the woman's body reprograms the man's body. If he's devoted and present during the pregnancy, her body will reprogram his body and change his hormonal structure so that when his child is born, his body is more in tune with that child. But that happens through the mom's body as like a bridge. And literally, like the mom's body, if the father is devoted and present, it will cause a rise in prolactin. And what they found in these studies was that the rise in prolactin that the mom's body creates in the dad's body makes the dad's body more responsive to his child's cries once the baby is born. So there's all this incredible science, all these ways to celebrate women's bodies, honor women's bodies, protect women's bodies. That needs to be embedded in our culture if we want to be protecting the woman's ability to be the matrix of our species. And all these norms have been against that. They have been against women's biology. And there's so many women have approached me with the release of this film, the promotion of this film, sharing their stories, much like yours, the stories of getting explants, of realizing that culture caused them to have beliefs that made it okay to just harm their bodies. And
Right.
it's really good to see women waking up out of this. And I think what I'm trying to encapsulate in this film is the experience of being a girl, being a woman, and like how kind of freaky it has been for a long time.
Right.
You know, like one of the news stories that you saw in the film where they have the girl saying, I have to do something crazy to make me feel happy. Okay.
Yeah. Insane.
That news story, it was about the trend in young girls getting new body parts for back to school. But it wasn't an expose showing
Not
something
new
dark.
clothes, new
Not
body
new
parts.
clothes, new body parts. And they were presenting this as a norm, as just like the cool new trend. They weren't critical of it. And back in the day, people weren't looking at that and thinking that was strange. Again, that was normalized. That was just a news story that was on the TV. Why have we allowed this? Why have we allowed this? And so how much do we really need to turn around? If we're going to be responding to this gender craze in girls, it is so incorrect to be fighting against the left wing, or anything like that. It's not about that. Like, yes, left-wing politics has been the vehicle to bring gender ideology into the world, sure. But the only reason it plugged in so magnificently, right, like in a way that just took off, was because these cultural foundations were properly installed and we all helped install them and normalize them. So like we all need to take responsibility for what we've created here, even though there are elements to this that can be seen as warfare, and there are people with ill intentions targeting women and children. That is true. But the way they've been successful is by using us as participants, and we need to end our participation in all of this.
Totally. And, I also think as adults, as people, whether you have children or not, like me, I don't have children. And that doesn't mean that I get to stay silent on this issue. Right. It is the world that I'm still going to be living in when that younger generation, it's the Gen Z. Is that right? I think it's the Gen Z, right? When they're in their 20s, when they're in their 30s, like I'm still going to be around. And so like that is a world I want to be a participant in. And therefore I have this responsibility now to be looking at Facebook and looking at Instagram, which is still Facebook, and looking at Google and Jeff Bezos and, these few people at the top, that it's really fascinating that somehow it's the same few people that end up having the same thoughts, the same agenda, the same output, which is a whole other conversation on its own, but encourage people to start critically thinking about why is it always the same people that are kind of pushing the same narrative, and they all have the same beliefs that they're pushing. And if you go against that, if you question it, you're being shut down, you're being censored. And in most cases right now that we're seeing in the United States more than in Canada, judges in the States are literally taking children away from their parents because they don't want to subscribe to affirming gender that they don't believe is right for their child, or not allowing their child under 18, guys, like their child, to go through a sex change, a sex transition, which is it's just baffling. And in your film, you actually speak about this, or you show it anyways, what is really this difference between the millennials, which are your younger 20s, I believe it's between 22 and 24, something like that, versus the Gen Z, which are in your teens, right? Like the 14 to 18-year-olds type of thing. And the increase of suicide and there's a massive difference with the Gen Z of being up 62%, whereas the millennials are up 17%. And the biggest differential that experts can attribute this to is the introduction of Facebook combined with the iPhone, now in the hands of young people, kids at a younger age, spending more time being exposed to the narrative, what they're trying to push, in this ideology of what is beauty, what is value, what is your worth, through social media and through Miley Cyrus, through the Kardashians, all of that. And again, I think of like our generation, we didn't have social media, period. And my biggest challenge was looking at the other girls in school that were the pretty girls and I wasn't them. And I think of how that made me feel versus having thousands and millions of impressions that you are scrolling all day, liking, not getting the amount of likes because your boobs aren't this way, or you're a female and you think it would be, you'd get more likes if you're a male. Like it's insane how we have just utilized, or how social media has been utilized to literally destroy, and is killing. Literally, it's killing, murdering. If you want to go there, I'll go there. It is murdering our younger generation, and it's wrong, and it should be completely accountable, which they're the ones controlling everything. And you just know that it's not, they will get off. I don't even know if I should say this, but I'm going to say this. And if I need it, edit it out, we could do that. But just the other day, I had somebody send me, and I have to do my research on this, and I just didn't have time. So unfortunately, I don't know the actual truth of it. But apparently, Mark Zuckerberg is being alleged with trafficking charges right now, which doesn't surprise me, because when you look at Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, these are all, and I talk about this constantly, these are all portals and vehicles to trafficking youth today.
Oh, yes.
It's such an easier vehicle.
Oh, yeah.
And it's manipulating, and they are finding new victims on there. And then they're threatening victims that if they don't comply, that it's going to be pushed out all over the internet, right? Like all over social media. And as you know, I have an organization called Freedom that fights human trafficking. And for the last literally 10 years, we have been advocating and speaking on national television, to universities, to students, to parents. For me, the most important is speaking to the parents, because they don't realize, they think that putting a smartphone in their kids' hands makes them safe because it's accessible to the parents, right? Like if you're in trouble, you can call your mom, you can call your dad. I always say to parents, if they're really in trouble, by the time they know they need to call you, it's too late. They're not able to call you. They probably won't have their phone in their hand. And we see constantly how social media is used to prey on vulnerable kids and luring them to a meeting point where they think that they're meeting a young boy who is attractive, who is complimenting them. And 9 times out of 10, that's not the scenario that ends up taking place. And it goes down into literally their worst living nightmare. And the importance of, having these conversations with the parents to empower their children.
I think it's really important to look at these social media platforms for a lot of reasons. Number one, they have been enabling pedophilia, enabling it. Okay. They're not trying to stop it.
No.
The reason I know that is because myself and a huge community of people were censored off these platforms at the drop of a hat, and yet they can't get all the people who are posting open pedophilia off their platforms.
Yeah.
Why? Yeah. Why is it so easy to purge people who are challenging the narrative, people who challenged the COVID narrative, people who challenge any official narrative? They can be purged in coordination across platforms that are supposed to be separate businesses.
Yeah.
And yet you have platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. They are all enabling pedophilia. And in fact, I was part of organizing a protest across the United States and Canada against Balenciaga when their campaign came out that had children holding BDSM teddy bears. They had a campaign that had satanic messaging in them. They changed the name of Balenciaga to Baal, and Baal is the Canaanite god of child sacrifice. So they were putting overt messaging about sacrificing children in their campaigns. I was part of organizing this protest against Balenciaga through Mom Army and Dad Army. And so in our research, going through Instagram, we found all these accounts that were posting art that was just pedophilia-based art. It was about abusing children, sexualizing children. I was then punished by Instagram. They took away my ability to collaborate with other creators on Instagram because I was exposing pedophilia accounts on the platform and standing up against Balenciaga. So what does that tell you?
Totally.
Why? You know what I mean? Like they are overtly, I think it's not crazy to say that there is infiltration of some kind of agenda to help support the culture of pedophilia on these
Totally.
platforms. You look at Elon Musk taking over Twitter, all of a sudden he was able to purge this massive problem
Yeah.
with child porn on Twitter that for
Yeah.
some reason wasn't being dealt with before he
Yeah.
was running it. Why? We have to ask why. And there is a lot of messaging saying, do not theorize about conspiracies, right?
Mhm.
But I think that term in and of itself being twisted the way that it has, this is a very strange thing that you shouldn't have theoretical thoughts about powerful people conspiring to do bad things. Why is that a thought crime? Even that people should be questioning. So I think, the way that these platforms have changed the game with child trafficking, not only is it luring kids into these scenarios in public, and we saw this going up during the pandemic. So the lockdowns really created this. It created a big problem with this. A lot more children were lured into these scenarios because of the lockdowns. But you also have now children being digitally trafficked, where they're getting tricked into putting sexual content online, and then that's being stolen and that's being plugged into these pornography networks. And so they're not even being physically trafficked. It's just their body, their digital images now. And this is happening to girls and women. You even have celebrities speaking out who are saying that their nudes were stolen from them and then plugged into all these pornography networks, and that they were digitally trafficked. Right. So, I think these platforms are not being held accountable in terms of what they're enabling. And it's pretty scary. I shared something in my stories today of, a teenage girl posing on, I think it was TikTok or something. And you look at the comments and it's all middle-aged men and older men. Right. So what is really going on here? And are we protecting our society from enabling pedophilia and the culture of pedophilia? And I think that's really important to understand, that it's been allowed to thrive to the extent that they now have their own culture. They have their own art world where they're sharing things openly. They're sharing messaging in campaigns like the Balenciaga one. And I think it's a hard road to go down for some people because it's very dark. It's hard to accept some of these things going on, but it's there, and people need to understand what's happening here.
And I think if you're listening to this, so, I'll say two things. You bring up the accounts that are being blocked and censored. And when you look at it, it's a commonality. This isn't just happening on a one-off. Freedom, my organization that only fights human trafficking, exploitation of people, of children, which is majority women and children, men and boys are involved, but especially in Canada and the United States, the two most prevalent forms of trafficking are forced labor and sexual exploitation. So, and sexual exploitation is a more comfortable way of saying to be raped, like basically paying to rape over and over again, usually about 10 to 15 times a day. And that's the majority in Canada and the United States. And so that's our platform. That's all we talk about on there is human trafficking. And anytime we do a major campaign where there's a lot of push out, there's a lot of movement, we always get censored. I lost control of our account for like 2 weeks last year, and I had to appeal it. And you're seeing this over and over again. And there's this theme, and to your point of asking, you need to ask why. Why are they blocking? And even the Freedom CEO, if you go right now, if you go and look at episodes 1 through 8, and you try to see who I've tagged in the episodes, we all know when you see Simon's episode released, I would naturally tag you in that post. I don't have that ability right now because I've already violated the community standards of Instagram. And I'm like, I just started. You clearly don't like the name Freedom. Yeah. That's a problem. And you might be looking into me and you see the connections. I have no idea, but I'm already being censored on that platform. And so you see there's this commonality of people who are speaking out in truth. And a lot of this has to come back to the children. Yeah. And so you have to ask the question, why? And you bring up a really good point around the pedophilia, the normalization. And there's so many letters now happening between the LGBTQ plus. And most people don't realize that the plus that is coming, the plus that is, this whole woke bullshit, in my opinion, I said it, is the next step. And if you don't know this yet and you don't realize this yet, this is what's coming, is that the plus is the love is love, and young love, AKA your child who is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, it is fine for an adult to want to have sex, which for me is raping a child.
Yeah.
And what's happening right now with the transphobe and saying that children know what they want is when we look at what's going to happen next year, maybe, that this whole thing is going to migrate into children know that they want to have sex, even though they don't know what sex is, with an adult.
Yeah.
And this is the runway. And so for people who don't know that, and I can't wait, Simon, you're going to have to make a film about that, because this is what's coming next.
I'm already on it, actually. It's already.
I love that. I love that. Because, I mean, you know that. I mean, then
the language they're using, so first they started with minor attracted persons.
Right.
That's what they're trying to switch the language to. You have academics, like people in universities, university professors trying to say we should call pedophiles minor attracted persons so we don't stigmatize them. They got a lot of pushback from that. I saw a recent attempt to change the language again to say intergenerational sex.
Right.
That's the new term that they're trying to use. There's lots of games going on here with language. And it's really important to recognize that this is not supported by gay, lesbian, trans people at large. That is not true. Right. That community has been exploited and manipulated and used for this agenda, which is why you have groups like Gays Against Groomers. Okay, this is a massive movement of people speaking out against this. You know, their voices are very important. Some of them are going to be at the world premiere of my film because we're really trying to share their messaging. It's so important. And I think people don't realize it until it's too late with some of these very slow creeping campaigns, which is why we need to speak out early enough to call it out for what it is. There's some really freaky things going on that people have to take the time to look at. And I think it's important to recognize that you should take your time, right? People don't need to go down the rabbit hole too fast that it traumatizes them. I do think people should recognize that there's a lot of pretty serious darkness to uncover. And there is a pushback that you cannot imagine. I have been on Twitter openly debating pedophiles. Like, they're open pedophiles. They're on Twitter defending pedophilia. And what they'll do is they'll share quotes from historical figures who say that they had sex when they were children and they loved it and it was beautiful and they grew up fine. And that this is the culture of pedophilia, right? They have tried to normalize it, naturalize it, and they'll say things like, yeah, but if the child enjoys it, then what harm is being done? Right. So they have really tried to pull together arguments to support this idea that children can consent to sex. And you're absolutely right that it is deeply tied to this idea that they can also consent to genital surgery, to puberty blockers, to double mastectomies, to hysterectomies, that they know who they are. It's all part of the same philosophy that children know who they are, they know what they want. And this is fundamentally untrue. We have decades of developmental psychology and neurology and all these sciences that have shown that this is just not true of children. And anyone who has raised children knows this. Unfortunately, you do have ideologically captured parents who are not able to think clearly. So I would say that we have sort of two things going on with parents right now in this space. On the one hand, you have parents who have their own trauma from childhood.
Correct.
Okay? Parents who are themselves damaged and they are projecting their trauma onto their children by allowing these things to happen. Yeah. And so they end up virtue signaling and doing all these very strange things in their parenting choices. And they're trying to normalize their own sort of childhood abuse. So they'll put their children out there in front of, drag queens with the children dancing and taking money and being shown that if you dance sexually, you'll get adult attention, you'll get praise, then you'll get money, giving that messaging to children. So you have parents with their own childhood traumas being projected onto their children. And then on the other side of it, you also just have parents who really do want to do the right thing, but they cannot navigate the information warfare. They go to Google, they go to Scientific American, they try to find dissent and they find no dissent. And so they go along with these ideologies, and that's not their fault because voices like myself and like yourself who are speaking out against this are often censored from their news feeds. And so I'll bring it back to why we need to not become overly political and attack one side versus the other, is because there are good-hearted people, there are good-hearted parents trying to navigate this warfare, and they're unable to find good information. And so that's one of the reasons I want to get my film out there. And it's one of the reasons, actually, if people go to daughtersofthewestfilm.com, I put a resources section that is therapists, legal support, educational support. It's a huge growing list of resources for parents and for families trying to navigate this. That is hard information to find right now, but that will help you. You know, some of it is parents who have already lost their children to this, who are grieving, who are sharing their wisdom. We're talking about where they made the mistakes and what they didn't see in social media and smartphones and all of that. So, you know, people need to be armed with good information. That takes work because it means we have to fight censorship against massive corporate social media entities. And it's very, very unfortunate that that's the state of the world, and that someone in Canada or America, you know, they don't know that this was shut down in the UK, in Norway, in Sweden. They don't know that. And so to an extent, it's not their fault. So I think because we can't know when a parent, I mean, sometimes it's obvious, but you can't really know when a parent is doing this because of their own trauma versus they just couldn't find good information. So you have to start with compassion. You have to start with understanding. And that's what I didn't see happening. It's one of the reasons I made this film. When I saw the way that the transgender issue was being treated by both left and right wing media, it was just, no, this is wrong. They're not approaching it in a way that is going to actually create the dialogue and the networks we need, because we need strong networks. You need a network to fight a network. And that's the only way to do this.
And in conjunction with that, the unity of people coming together, part of the reason why this has infiltrated in such a twisted way, if you will, amongst the children, is because we as a people right now are so divided. Yep. And when you have that division, we as the people are weak, and they, being the top elite, the top people, the government, whatever you kind of maybe know of right now in your own knowledge, they have the control, they have the power, because we are so divided. And it's really important that, especially on this issue, that we look at the children, like we bring it back to the kids, that this isn't about if you're on the left or you're on the right side. And I love that you brought up compassion, and also understanding that what's going on with the children in the woke movement does not represent the voice for gays, for lesbians, even for transgender. And I follow a lot, actually, personally, that are speaking out against this and are also, again, alluding to the plus that's coming, and that the plus shouldn't even be there. And they don't want to be associated with it. And I want to encourage people who are listening, or if you're tuning in and watching, regardless of where you are at on your journey, you might not agree with what Simon and I are talking about today. But if you can take a step back and start to critically think, and you can take your time in this, you will see the pattern. And in a year from now, when this whole new ideology around pedophilia is trying to be further normalized, I would ask you come back to this episode and remember seeing the pattern, seeing the conditioning that is happening. And then you have to go back and ask why. You have to start critically thinking. And right now, most people will say, yeah, obviously an adult desiring to have sex or desiring to take advantage of or desiring to rape a kid is not okay. But their goal is to normalize that. And it is going to be subtle. One of the things you brought up actually in your film that I think is really worth us just speaking about is we are in this state right now where all of the woke is trying to be normalized, and this acceptance. And amongst this acceptance, quote unquote, there wouldn't be a better time for a transgender adult to just all of them to be coming out of the woodwork. And what you're not seeing is not that it has to be necessarily an even balance, right? But what you're not seeing is all of these transgender adults saying, oh, me too. Now I can come out and I can share who I am. There is a big disproportion to that happening. And logic would say, statistics would say, not just logic, but statistics would say, we should see some type of increase in adults where we're seeing this massive influx of children, and that is not happening. And that for me goes back to going, why? Why is the CDC pushing this? Why is the government pushing this? Why is the Canadian government spending my tax dollars into funding? Why is the United States government putting money into this? Why? And what's happening is this all of a sudden this influx amongst children, but you're not seeing it in adults.
Yeah, it's freaky. I think, in Canada, they have stripped away parental rights based on the gender affirmative model. So if you, as a parent in Canada, have a child who comes forward saying, I'm a different gender, and you don't affirm that child's gender, and let's say you try to get them counseling just to connect with their own body, that can be seen as conversion therapy. That is legally seen as conversion therapy. You can be charged. You can lose custody of your child. You can be arrested. The laws are against parental rights here, and they push this idea that the gender affirmative model needs to be trusted absolutely without question. And again, why is that the law when other nations have reversed it? Why? Why have our parental rights been stripped away? It's why, you have to watch it very closely if your children are in school, because they're being given this messaging that they could be in the wrong body. And what is a little kid supposed to do with that idea? With an adult saying, are you trapped in the wrong body? How could a little child navigate that? We're on an unschooling family. We have gone down that path of unschooling with our kids, and it has proved itself time and time again, watching what is going on in the world for children specifically. And I think, to your point, the explosion that we've seen in trans youth, and I would even say, like, what is a trans child? I've made some content on that because that concept doesn't even really land properly when you look into it. But the explosion in girls, it's a totally new phenomenon in that the science of gender dysphoria for decades, it was mostly just young boys, very, very young boys, like preschool age boys were the ones who are actually experiencing clinical gender dysphoria, where they were like hating their genitals. They had a serious mental issue with their gender. And that was decades of science. There wasn't really girls. There wasn't actually any real studies, like peer-reviewed studies on girls with gender dysphoria until 2012. Then what happens in like 2015 is all of a sudden you have an explosion of trans adolescent girls with no history of gender dysphoria at all, which is a completely new phenomenon. And this is one of the things that was cited in the UK. They're like, we have no idea why this is happening, so we can't use the gender affirmative model because we don't know in the first place why we have a totally new phenomenon in science. We don't have anything to back that up. So, I think it's just really important that people understand the issue, that they get access to good information. It's why I made the resources section on my website. And I made this film really to try to save girls, to try to inform families, and to try to create a broader dialogue around this issue, because I don't believe it's being approached correctly, even in some of the pushback, which, like I said, a lot of that is coming from right-wing media that is often spinning it in a way that's detrimental as well.
So, Simon, let me ask you maybe a hard question, because, we can talk about the injustice of all of this left and right. And the question still comes down to, like, but why? Like, who benefits? What is the gain in really fucking up our children? And why is this, in your opinion, like, what do you think?
There are three end goals that I have seen. I have studied documents that outline a war on humanity, that cite a war whose end game is to install a new world order. And that's the terms that they use. Yeah. And I would say, as part of the warfare strategies that are outlined in all sorts of different evidence that I've seen, there are three end goals that this agenda creates. Number one, it is a big part of the war on the family. And the war on the family is specifically designed to make it so that you don't have stable families generation after generation that gather new human knowledge and wisdom, that protect old human knowledge and wisdom, and make sure it gets to as many generations in the future as possible. That is what families and communities are very, very good at doing when they are stable generation after generation. So if you have a population that cannot produce these stable families, that generate wisdom, knowledge about living a good, happy, stable life, and that gets passed on over and over again, then that population is at the whims of information given to them from these authoritarian centralized systems. They cannot rely on family wisdom. They're only at the whims of what is in the media, what is released, by large corporations and by these systems of information that we're surrounded by. So that's one element of it. There is also what seems to be a depopulation agenda going on. And, one of the ways to look at that is that you have a lot of people like Bill Gates going on about the population problem, that we need to deal with the human population problem. But anyone who's saying that, you look into it and we're actually struggling to produce babies. There's actually a crisis right now in our ability to produce babies. There's a fertility crisis in men and women. Jordan Peterson just did a really good episode on this, that there is a growing problem with unplanned childlessness.
Right.
Couples that just cannot produce a child no matter what they do. So we have the opposite of a population problem. We are having a fertility crisis. So anyone who's telling you there is a population issue on Earth, they're disinforming you, and that's easy to find out. And so when you look into what's happening with a lot of these girls, they're being sterilized. Their ability to produce children is being permanently taken away from them through gender affirmative care. So that's one element. And then I think the final element that is sort of the longest view of this is that all of this supports the philosophy of transhumanism. And, the end goal of transhumanism, the clearest place we can see it is something I spoke to at the beginning of this episode, that this message that your body is an obstacle to who you are, and that's been driven into us over and over again. That is the core philosophy of transhumanism, that we need to transcend the human form using technological and medical intervention. And I would say, if you look at all these patterns, you do see a normalization of transhumanism, the philosophy of it. So those three things, I would say, goals or warfare strategies, they all seem to be well supported by what is going on right now. And I think that's something people should be open to.
Yeah, I echo everything you said. So that's very much in line with my thought. And, I think what we have seen in the past few years, and even now, there are different things emerging that will actually take life, whether it's through a shot. I don't call it a vaccine because it was never approved. It's never gone through clinical trials. We were the clinical trials. The FDA never gave it the authority and the approval on it. It only gained that because the Emergency Act was invoked, and therefore they were given permission, not approval, to use a shot, which we're seeing. Again, that's another one. You can go to Google and just put in "died suddenly," and you will see it all over the world coming out. So whether it's through an experimental shot or causing such confusion in your own self and transitioning to detransitioning, or transitioning and feeling that you made a mistake. And in your film, you highlight a couple stories of which I shared, it really moved me, and I was grieving. Like, I started crying watching these kids, these young people, which then caused me, and I encourage people to do the same, because obviously as a film producer, you are biased to your own objective and message in your film, as you should be. But you can go outside of Simon's film and start looking at other stories, other testimonies of kids that are saying, I'm now in my late 20s, I'm in my 30s, and I can't go back, and I'm permanently damaged, or one girl who transitioned to a boy and wants to go back and now goes, I can't ever have children. And I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to be loved because of how messed up I am. And all of these type of feelings and what you will live with for the rest of your life will unfortunately end up taking the life of so many of these kids who will, I say, get murdered by suicide, because I do not believe that it was inherently them, but that they were conditioned amongst what is going on right now. And for me, that's part of their strategy. When you talk about eliminating population control, it is less obvious if somebody does it themselves. It's less obvious if it's a mechanism like a shot that right now some are being correlated to died suddenly, and looking at the shot. But what happens in 5 years from now when we start seeing more people passing away, and it's going to be ticked off as a heart attack? It's going to be ticked off as blood clot. And it's not going to be the box next to it also had the shot. Like, that's just not going to happen. So there's going to be all of these continuum deaths. And I even now next coming with the pedophilia crisis, where you're going to have children who are being in these rape relationships, grow up with trauma, and probably won't make it past the age of 16 because they can't handle what they've now been through. Yeah. So I look at that end goal agenda around the control, and that this is all about control. It's all about man beating God at his own game and saying, actually, we can do it, right? And so the more you confuse, the more you divide, the more that other person has that ability, and the more you break the human spirit, the more they have that ability to control you. And that's, for me, it's a very clear agenda. And once upon a time, the Agenda 2030 was like labeled as a conspiracy theorist. Same thing saying WEF, and again, for people who don't know what that is, you really should at this point. In love, I say that, the World Economic Forum. But, I was posting about it, talking about it, and got labeled all kinds of things. And I own those, and I'm so happy to have had that. That's fine. But the agenda is there. It's very, very clear. And it's now being brought into mainstream media that the World Economic Forum has gathered, and Trudeau was there, and Klaus Schwab's, and George Soros. And, it's like, well, what just happened in 2020 that we were all labeled a conspiracy theorist and the WEF didn't exist? And now it's literally in news headlines. It's completely mind-blowing. And years ago, pre-COVID, and if you go on my Instagram feed and you scroll back enough, you will see that Time Magazine, not Simon Esler, not Shane Vidiata, Time Magazine published on the cover the New World Order that you brought up. And this was way, way, way before 2020. And they're not hiding the agenda. You just have to go and look for it, but they're not hiding it from you. And so, things like this, I just think it's so important, like through your film, and encouraging people to like go past the film, to continue to ask the questions, the hard questions, the uncomfortable questions, because you will find the truth if you seek it. And I always say it's kind of the golden standard for me. Follow the money. When you talk about kids and hormone blockers and the transition and the surgical procedures, then the therapist, and then the drugs they put them on to cope with all the depression and anxiety, all of this, who's winning? Big Pharma continues to win. There's so much money there, so much money, right?
Yeah. Well, we're talking about each child that is transitioned. If they live a life as a trans person, they will themselves produce millions of dollars for the pharmaceutical industry. They are locked into a life of pharmaceutical dependence that they cannot get out of. Because even if they detransition, then there's so much damage, they might need a lot of other things. So, transitioning one human being already produces millions. So you're looking at $1 billion industry in this idea of mass transing kids and even adults. Absolutely. That is a big part of it. There's huge money to be made. And even in my film, I show that the surgeons were already looking to make money off of cosmetically altering teenagers' genitalia. They already were loving that. They were already fighting against parents who were trying to not consent to this. They were upset that gynecologists were not promoting labiaplasties in their clinics. So there was already a desire to make money off of modifying children's bodies, and all of this was already there. So you're absolutely right. I think if people feel skeptical, that's good. Feel skeptical, but don't let anyone else do your thinking for you.
Totally.
Including us. Free thought is the guiding light here. The ability to produce thoughts based on empiricism, which is your own direct experience, logic, reason, and to be free of using dogma, authority, and tradition. And if you can produce thoughts in that way, and then you can go out there and seek what you think is going on, that to me is like the ultimate tool. And that's what I have tried to develop in myself. And it's what I seek to develop in my children, in raising them in what is essentially a war zone, a modern war zone that they need to be prepared for.
Totally. And it's extremely liberating and it's very empowering, when you're able to not have to outsource your trust because you don't know, right? Like to not know. And this is again, I created that. I didn't create it, but I created a hashtag on my own platform that was do the research, in 2020. And that was my heart was Shay's opinion does not matter. My opinion does not matter. Simon's opinion does not matter. What matters is the truth and the facts. So I'm presenting in love and light what I have researched, and you should go and do the same thing. If I'm sharing something, go challenge it. Go and challenge it, and that's how we have these great conversations of dialogue to evolve our thought, to evolve our thinking and our thought process, that there could be a chance that what I know to be true right now in this moment that I think is true. But again, that's my opinion. That actually doesn't mean it's true, right? The facts are the truth. Sometimes what we misconstrue as truth is not actually truth, but we believe it to be so.
Yeah.
And so we must be open to hearing a different way and then challenging it and testing it, which is actually what science is. Testing it, right? Like talk about science, right? Hypothesis, and you test it over and over and over again. And you look at it from different ways. You're not just told this is the science one way. No different than what Shay says is not quote unquote the truth one way. You should test it.
Yep.
Go do the research. And more when I did this, and again, following the money, it's not enough just to go big pharma. Who owns big pharma? Who owns Pfizer? And then who are his friends at Pfizer? Who's invested in Pfizer? And when you see that people like Bill Gates continue to come up again, or George Soros, Klaus Schwab, all of these people, you start putting together the bigger puzzle that's happening. You start seeing the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And that's where you have this unwavering knowing that what you have researched is what's really going on, and you can see it. So then therefore you can see the agenda.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. Because it's about combining your research with your real life experience. What do you see around you?
Right.
Like that's a huge anchor. You see a lot of this around you. So you want to connect what you're looking into with what is happening around you. For us, very, very apparent. Suddenly our homeschool community expanded because parents were rapidly pulling their children out of the schools because they were forcing gender ideology on them.
Right.
So, that was my personal experience. That wasn't something I got from right-wing media. I watched it happen. I watched people have realizations about what was going on during COVID. People who I thought were going to be lifelong sort of stuck in the mud skeptics who were like, holy shit, something is really going on. So I'm watching, I'm seeing, yes, there are people waking up who I never thought would be able to do that. I watch what's occurring in my community. Someone who lives in my building, I'm watching this person transition. I'm watching her go through the process, and knowing what I know, to me, it's an unfortunate thing to see. But at the same time, it is just evidence of what is occurring, that I don't need to trust these sources and allow them to create certainty in me. I can ground what I know in my life. And I think this has all gotten to the point where all of us are faced in real time in our daily lives with evidence. And that when you do research, you just have to connect it with your own direct life experience. And that is like one of the greatest anchors you can have. And that's empiricism. That's really what I think is so important about free thought, that it's rooted in empiricism. And we've been gaslit to think that we cannot use our life experiences to know something. You have to get a study from an authority. Yeah, if you don't see it in the mainstream media, if it's not given to you by a peer-reviewed study, then it cannot be truth. And we're totally gaslit. What if your personal direct life experience says that what's in that study is untrue because you lived it? Right. Well, we shouldn't be gaslit that way. We shouldn't allow ourselves to be gaslit that way. So, trust your direct experience, live your life, and watch it very carefully. And the truth will unfold itself from there as well. Because some of these sources we've been told are authorities are not really authoritarian. They're authoritarian, but they're not true authorities in terms of knowledge. And that's been a big lesson for me.
Simon, I could talk to you all day. I'm like, and we've already said I'm having Simon come back because we've got more films being produced. We have more topics that we have to cover. And it's just so important. And I'm really grateful that I've known you for so long, and you are an incredible man. You're an incredible dad, incredible husband that is just speaking truth and doing your part to help others also maybe find their way or find a new way. And so I am just so grateful for your time and coming on. You are on the Freedom CEO, and I know we've kind of talked a little bit about this, so this might sound obvious as an answer with the question, but I'm going to ask you anyway. So when you think of being the CEO of your life, meaning being the chief decision maker over your life, in doing that, how has that given you freedom?
I think it's given me freedom in terms of standing my ground, even when it's a big risk for me, and recognizing the difference between taking risks that are, genuinely harmful and stupid, and taking risks that are something that I can be proud of when I talk to my children about what I'm doing with my life. And having my sons there every day and being able to show them what it means to run my own business and to be self-reliant and to be merging my desire to be prosperous for my family with my desire to help humanity together. It has clarified that for me. And there have been lots of mistakes along the way, which is fine. That is part of the process. But I think it's shown me that you can reflect what you need to reflect to the next generation. You can show them the kind of self-mastery that is going to empower them. And, when I first found out that I was going to be having a child, it was a very intense moment because my fear was I'm not prepared for this, which I think a lot of parents experience.
Sure.
And if I could do one thing, it would be to go back and to give myself, a little more support and softness there, and recognize that it's not really about being totally prepared. It's about allowing the passion that comes from being a parent to drive you and being, I guess, like you said, like the CEO of your own life. But once you're a parent, you're the CEO of like a family of these children's paths. And it has motivated me so deeply to transform myself. So I look at it that way, that, family has transformed my sense of purpose and my sense of freedom and my sense of individual mission. And I am really happy to be showing my children that path, even though it has been a huge risk and an immense challenge.
So beautiful. And I appreciate you sharing. I love that answer. I am going to be putting everything in the show notes on how to not just find Simon, but you can go check out his film. You can do the pre-order. We talked about a lot of unique different things in today's conversation. So I'm going to link up some of that as well. But make sure to give Simon a follow because he's doing incredible work. And you guys all need to go follow his voice on the daily because it's powerful. So thank you, Simon.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning into the Freedom CEO podcast. If you got value out of today's show, I would love for you to leave a review, as it will help my show reach other people as well. You know what to do. Download this episode, click the like and subscribe button. If you feel like spreading more love, hop over to Instagram and share today's show in your stories. Remember to tag Shane Vidiata and the Freedom CEO. My DMs are always open, so drop me a line. I'd love to connect. Until next time, keep owning your decisions to live a life of freedom. Live a life you love.